Hey there hunters, welcome back to the Gunners Guild. We're here with another relatively short video today, I hope. Here in Remnant 2, we have 12 new mutators that were added in the most recent patch, even though it wasn't in the patch notes. I know I said 9 last time, but apparently there's 12. So today we're going to cover them, point out the good ones, and I'm just going to explain what I changed to the other ones and all that stuff. So before we get into that though, I do want to talk about how to get these mutators. Basically, they're going to spawn from any of the new aberrations, not the pre-existing ones. And you can farm these pretty much anywhere during this Halloween event up till the end of October. But after that, they're just going to be kind of random spawn, 25% chance on an apocalypse, and they're going to take the place of an elite spawn essentially. Now you can farm these really fast the next couple days by either sitting in front of the root nexus on Yesha, and then getting it down to like a third of its HP, and then it'll just constantly spawn one of these guys like every minute or so. Or what I had done was that I had ran through Keula's Rest over here in Yesha, because it's relatively short and it's pretty packed full of enemies, and you can get about 2 elite triggers, and then this is either going to spawn a group of enemies, typically about 3 archers, an elite, or an aberration. And for the most part, it was getting an aberration about every other time. So you can go through Keula's Rest and just run through. If you don't see one spawn, use your liquid escape, go back and do it again. And that's pretty much what I did, and it was pretty consistent to get them to spawn. It still did take a good amount of time, like 6+ hours to get these things on farm. But, I mean, you might as well get this in now before they get to like a 25% chance rather than like a 100% chance. But anyway, let's not waste too much more time. Let's dive into these mutators. To start, we have Battery. While not a new one, it did get reworked this patch. It now grants you a 20% weak spot buff for 10 seconds per 400 mod power spent, and does stack up to 3 times. When you use a mod that costs 1200 or more, you do get all 3 stacks at the same time. The level 10 bonus also grants you extra weak spot crit chance just passively, which is nice. Now this mutator is actually very strong. I mean, 60% weak spot damage, come on. But it's best paired with weapons that have an active mod that can be spammed or match up to that 10-second duration. So like ammo mods, which will proc all 3 stacks, may seem like a good idea, but these mods last 20 seconds, so you'd only have this mutator up for half the duration with no way to refresh it, so that's not really going to work out. What it does work well on though are things like Crescent Moon. When paired with the mod that has a 13-second duration, it will grant a big damage buff for the entire duration of Crescent Moon's mod. While you do lose Supercharger, the damage per hit's actually almost as good, so you can kind of change your shots per second to make it slower and more manageable, but with comparable damage because you're just dealing a lot more per shot. Nightfall is also another great choice for the new Battery mutator, which matches up perfectly, and even compared with things like Momentum, this does do a similar damage output, but without the need for crit stacking. Now, I'm sure there are more uses for Battery and more things that are going to be added to the DLC, so keep an eye on this one. 60% weak spot damage and 10% crit, it's pretty fat. Next, we have Bottom Feeder. I don't know how this one actually got implemented. I'm sure it will be nerfed because this mutator is specifically made to speed kill things with Spore Bloom. The mutator itself is pretty useless, granting more flat range damage when you have less ammo, which means that it's not even going to be useful for most of the time when you're playing with it. Even if you had only a little bit of ammo left, you're getting like 25% range damage, which, I mean, you can get like 20 flat range damage from any other mutator with no strings attached. So really, there's nothing great going on here. Now, what makes this thing broken as all hell is that the level 10 perk makes it so that when you run out of your ammo, you get 5 seconds of infinite ammo on a 1-minute cooldown. So you can just pre-dump all your ammo before a boss fight and turn on automatic weapons with, Bulletstorm or something, and then go in with Spore Bloom and go ham for 5 seconds, which is enough time to drop about 100,000 damage into something. So yeah, it's broken, but it'll be changed for sure. Next we have Bottom Heavy, which is a pretty cool one. Fire rate and reload speed are both great damage modifiers to have, and this ramps up the fire rate as you go through your clip. So things like SMG, LMG, Typewriter, Cube Gun all play very well with this one. And I do particularly like the Cube Gun since you can sit on 1 or even 0 cubes most of the time, just granting you all the fire rate all the time. But you do have to be careful because this does ramp up your heat like crazy as well. Then we have Ingenuity. This reduces your heat generation by 50%, which is a lot, and grants increased reload speed depending on how much heat you have when you reload. Higher heat increases your reload speed. While this is cool, there are only like 3 guns with heat management, and all 3 of them would prefer Momentum or Bottom Heavy for a pure DPS perspective. I'm sure the lack of heat buildup is nice because it will save you a ring slot, but in general, mutator slots are more powerful than rings, so I'd personally just stick to microcompressor. Kill Switch. I don't see any reason to use this one. It's the same as Toxic Release Valve, but it does 250 damage with an 8-second cooldown, that does get reduced for each enemy you kill with the fart or the explosive damage of the weapon it's attached to. On Apocalypse though, 25 HP is like nothing even if it is AoE, and while you can scale it with something like Detonation Trigger to do an AoE plus a fire dot, that's pretty much it. So I don't really see this thing doing anything special or outrageous or even cool, to be honest. So I would actually like to see the damage increase to like 500, and then the level 10 grant enemies that die due to this mutator explode on death and then damage nearby enemies, and if they die they explode on death, and just let out the chain kind of a thing. But that's just me. Moving on, we have Sequence Shot. This is another charged mutator, but the twist here is that this grants 35% reduced charge time after your first shot for 3 seconds, which is super easy to maintain. And at level 10, every single shot increases your crit chance by 1% up to 20%. And this is easily as good as Supercharger despite the conditions attached, but more importantly here is that now we have 2 charged mutators, so you can now play like Bow and Bolt Driver, or Alpha Omega and Corrupted Meridian, or basically any 2 charged weapons, and make full use of Archer's Crest in your ring slot for both of your weapons. So you're definitely going to see this one on other builds in the future. It's a great mutator. Up next, we have Spirit Healer. This one is also currently broken because it reintroduces the bug that makes summons and turrets get absurd damage scaling just by using this, kind of like the old Anastasia's ring. So that being said, the mutator itself is cool and it does actually what it says it does, granting you 1% HP per second for 5 seconds whenever you spend 300 mod power, which is basically nothing. While this isn't a lot of healing, it's pretty easy to sustain infinitely, so it's a really nice little extra heal for you and your team. It's a great addition for support builds, to be honest. And then the last one for ranged is Topheavy. This one is obviously designed for single shot weapons in mind, but even looking at it, at peak bonuses you get 15% range damage and 20% weak spot damage. I mean, that's fine, but Slayer still does more DPS due to also having reload speed attached to it. So I feel like this is going to be relegated to something like Sure Shot in your offhands, because honestly I don't know what other weapons you'd use this for. I'm not a big fan of it, and honestly I'd probably change it to be the base ability to grant up to 25% crit chance based upon the percent of ammo left in the magazine, and then have the level 10 ability make weapons fully automatic when above 50% ammo in the clip. Weird, I know, but I think it would be kind of wild to play with for a lot of weapons. Moving on, we have the melee mutators, and we're going to start with Edgelord. This grants a whopping 35% charged melee attack speed, on top of 10% more just melee attack speed. This is a lot of attack speed, which also means it's a lot of DPS. Now compared to Overdrive, which is a fat 25% crit chance and 45% crit damage while it's up, Edgelord is still going to be able to hold his own. While it might be slightly less DPS for sure, this still does 2 things for melee builds. One is it does allow you to scale more flat melee damage, as the attack speed will pretty much take care of the rest, so you don't need to stack crit all the time. But also the faster swings make it easier to weave attacks and dodges together, making this much better for bossing in general. So this is a great mutator. Up next in melee, we have Latency. This reduces the amount of charge needed for melee abilities that, require charge to work. So things like Feral Judgment can proc off of 4 hits instead of 6, and Red Doe Staff can also just pretty much spam the Red Deer charge infinitely as long as you have enemies that are taking those hits. And remember, the Red Doe Staff also heals for 10% of your HP every time you charge it, so this is a great pocket heal for you and your group if you need it. Not sure if it's worth using on Feral Judgment, but the damage boost this does provide is actually not too bad either, so it's not all a loss. So I don't know, maybe we'll see it on some other weapons in the future, but right now I'm sticking this thing on Red Doe Staff. Next we have Opportunist, which is the old perk from Remnant 1's Akari set. This makes perfect dodges grant the next single melee attack used within 3 seconds 100% chance to crit. While cool on paper, we can already stack crit really high on melee, especially with Overdrive, which also comes with a lot of crit damage as well. Honestly, I don't think Opportunist is really outclassing it or a lot of the other melee mutators, to be honest, and I don't think 1 crit per perfect dodge is all that useful. Even the level 10 ability isn't doing much for you either. If this was sustained for all melee hits for 3 seconds and let you perfect dodge again to add more 3 seconds for the level 10, I think that would be sick, but that's just what I would want. Now that brings us to Stormbringer. It's a 50% increased status damage applied by melee weapons. Now we could toss aside Gas Giant because that thing is awful, and we're left with basically Smolder and Krell Axe. 50% more status damage applied by these weapons isn't a lot, but what's interesting here is the level 10 perk. which grants a 10% increased status damage taken debuff for 10 seconds. Interesting because dot builds tend to use Curl Axe anyway to apply the overload from ranged, and you can stack like 6+ dots on an enemy, so you're getting 10% on all of those, which would be pretty excellent since we don't really need any other mutators for our melee build anyway. This is immediately going on the dot setup for sure, and it may be not super powerful right now, but who knows what kind of mods and other things we're going to see in the future DLC, so keep an eye out for Stormbringer. And that brings us to the last mutator, Shocker, and it's shocking how awful this thing is. After 5 swings, your next charged melee attack does a whopping 100 damage to all enemies within 10 meters. 100 damage. You can Spectral Blade AoE the entire screen for 2000 damage. This is absolutely 0 damage, and it doesn't scale with melee damage or anything at all except like shock damage scaling. And even so, the base damage is so low that it doesn't even matter. Can this thing get buffed like 10 times the damage numbers? Like 1000 damage every 5 hits doesn't seem all that bad, but right now, I don't see any reason why you would use this for anything. It's just bad. Anyway, that's all the mutators that were added, and my thoughts on them. Some hit, some miss. No mod mutators, which is big sad, but something is something, I guess. Maybe we'll see some more in the future. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and good luck out there, hunters.